Hello, everyone, and welcome to another evening in with Just Imagine. I'm Nikki Gamble, and no doubt today, teachers, librarians, you've all been celebrating World Book Day. That's if you're joining us from the UK. If you're somewhere else in the world, you're probably wondering why we have World Book Day on the 6th of March when the rest of the world has World Book Day on the 23rd of April. But that's another story. This evening, we're thinking about an important concern, children and young people's mental health, through the lens of books for children and young people. I'm joined this evening by Coral Rumble, author of Jacob's Otter, and Stuart Foster, author of the very recently published Pieces of Us. There will be an opportunity for you to put your questions to Stuart and Coral this evening, and I'll be opening the Q&A about a third of the way through this evening. Please put your questions in the Q&A when it's opened, rather than in the chat, as it's easier for us to locate them there. But in the meantime, please don't hide in the shadows. Introduce yourselves in the chat, because we'd love to know who's joining us. Before I introduce Coral and Stuart, here are a few statistical reminders that make it clear that mental health of young people is a pressing concern. The Children's Society reported recently that over the past 3 years, children's mental health issues have increased by 50%. That's based on the number of children that report their feelings of happiness. They estimate that in every class of 30 children, there will be 5 experiencing mental health problems. The Mental Health Foundation reports that 50% of mental health problems are established by the age of 14, and that 75% of them are established by the age of 24. So this really shows why it's important that we throw a lens or throw a spotlight, should I say, onto mental health in childhood and adolescence, and think about how we can deal with and support children through that. Just a couple more reports for you, highlighting slightly different things. The NHS report highlights that the sensitive teenage years, which is going to be important when we talk to Stuart, are really critical. 20.3% of 8 to 16-year-olds mental health issues are set during that period. And among 17 to 19-year-olds, the proportion is 23.3%. That's almost 1 in every 4. I also wanted to just highlight that the first report into eating disorders since 2017 was carried out in 2023, and that showed an increase from 1.6 to 20.8% in young women experiencing an eating disorder, which seems incredibly high. But for the first time, young men appear in that survey. In 2017, it was a 0%. Of course, that doesn't mean there weren't any young men, just that there weren't enough to enter into the statistics. But by 2023, that has risen to 5.1%. And then I also just briefly wanted to refer to Mind, whose report tells us that young people still don't understand mental health well, and that they find it really difficult to talk about mental health issues. The report also suggests, or again, children reporting on what they prefer to do, it says that young people and children prefer to seek their help in school or college, and that they expect to get really clear information from professionals in those organisations. Well, okay, statistics are one thing and stories are another, and really we're talking about stories today. Stories are so important because they help us to understand the lived human experience. And so I'm very pleased to be welcoming Stuart Foster and Coral Rumble to discuss how their stories help readers understand and empathise with characters facing their own mental health challenges. Books, as we know, from for those of us that work with young people, they're important because they have the potential to open up conversation in non-threatening ways. And so I would really love to welcome Coral and Stuart into the conversation. I'm sorry, it was quite a long introduction today, but those statistics are really startling, aren't they?
They are, yeah. Yes, so they are. They bring you up short, don't they? Because you can't quite believe that the percentages and the reports that are having to go on all the time for just to get a handle on this mental health issue.
Mm.
Yeah,
Uh,
I didn't think they were surprising that I think if you work in schools a lot, you see it,
Mm.
and you don't necessarily need the figures to know it, but
Mm.
I think they're quite low, to be honest, from my experience. So,
Yeah.
Of course, one of the problems in asking both of you to talk to us on a panel that is called Mental Health and Books for Young People is that it sort of pigeonholes your books, and they're about so much more than that. And I want to say that right at the outset. They're not manuals on how to deal with mental health, but obviously they do incorporate that. So we will be talking about that. So, first of all, just to introduce Coral's Jakob's Otter, this is the story in which we see 10-year-old Jakob Polanski going on holiday with family friends and their daughter Marta. They're offering to take Jakob for a break from his caring duties. His mother has multiple sclerosis. Neither Jakob nor Marta are very keen on the arrangement, and the story is narrated by Jakob and interspersed with Marta's journal, which is written in verse. Once in rural Italy, Jakob is inducted into the natural world under the guidance of a woodsman, Signor Mancini. And in this space that is set apart from Jakob's everyday environment, friendships bloom and flourish. Now, we're going to be delving more deeply into that book in a little while. But just to get us going, Coral, is there anything that you would add that I left out there? Because inevitably I will have done.
No, I think you've done a very good job, Nikki. How do you sum up a book in just a few sentences? Yeah, it is about mental health because Jakob has been taken away because people around him are worried about his mental health. Um, but I think as we look at someone else working through issues, there are lots of issues that just get thrown up all the time, and we all identify with them to a certain extent.
Yeah, really important. Now, Stuart Foster has been writing for children and young people for over 10 years. He doesn't only write for children and young people, but we have been very fortunate because he's given us many gems, including The Boy in the Bubble, All the Things That Could Go Wrong, and Can You Feel the Noise? Stuart, you are a great favourite of mine, as is Coral. So I'm really pleased to have you here.
thank you.
Pieces of Us, I'm going to try again to do that thing of sum up in a few words, but Pieces of Us is your first YA novel. And I think we need to say at the outset that it's probably most appropriate for readers from around 15 plus,
Mm.
that sort of year 10 level. The novel is written in the voice of Jonas. I didn't say Jonas. Phew, thank goodness for that. Now, he's an introverted college student who strikes up a friendship with Louis, another student in the year above him. Jonas is a writer, and Louis is an outgoing drama student with a wide circle of friends. Both young men have their struggles. Jonas suffers from body dysmorphia and bulimia. Louis is struggling with his public acknowledgement of his sexuality. But their friendship is about more than sharing their problems. It's also about the joy of shared creative endeavor, about music, writing, and performing. And just as close friends have the capacity to support each other, They also have the power to inflict deep hurt, but also to forgive. Okay, Stuart, that's my take on
Right.
it. Is that okay?
Yeah, 100%. You're good with that. Absolutely, I'm absolutely fine with that. Yeah, that's spot on. I think you did a better job than I would have done.
I don't know about that. But anyway, that's it in a nutshell. Now let's get into a little bit more detail here. What I'd like to know from both of you is the starting point for each of your books. So perhaps I'll come to you first, Coral.
Um, I think quite often in a book, I don't know if it's the same for every author. Um, for me, there were lots of different things that were floating around in my head. Um, uh, Having met lots of Polish children in schools on school visits, that was an influence. Um, being very aware of carers, young carers, that was another big influence. So, I was saying this at an event the other evening for UCLA, the other day, that there are actually, last year in a school census, there were recorded 54,000 carers in schools. And
Wow.
that's recorded. And lots of kids care for people in their home secretly. And that's the truth of it all. So with those figures, and then knowing that there are a lot more children who are having caring roles, that's huge. So that has been in my mind a lot recently. And then the nature thing, the help that we get from being in the natural world, that was another thing. And on top of that, there was the kind of feeling that I wanted interaction between cultures. So I wanted it to be a Polish boy living in London who goes to Italy and is helped by Italians to find himself, just to have the whole thing together, because we live, uh, well, we want to live without borders.
Mm. Yes.
So
Why
yeah.
does everything feel so pertinent at the moment? Everything does. Stuart, what about the starting point for you and Pieces of Us?
Um, Honestly, the subject is just kind of like omnipresent in my life, and yes, basically because yeah, it's always there for me. And I tried to put it into "Can You Feel the Noise," uh, where the girl is on drugs that made her put on weight, and I made a mention in "Mum, I'm getting fat" or something like that, and then a bit later on I did it again, and then my editor came in and said, "Not in this book." And then I kind of had a little go again, and then I just realised that I was having all these little bites, and it was pardon the pun, but I was having all these little bites, and I just thought, no, just go for the whole thing, and don't try to hide it anywhere, because obviously that's what I had been doing anyway. And it was just really then I just thought, this I had a conversation with my niece, and it came about that she had been making herself ill, being bulimic, and she kind of just turned around to me, and I just thought it's time to like say, well, do I just hide away and just say, "Oh, I feel sorry for you," or do I say, "I know what that feels like," and I kind of went, "I know what that feels like," and then we had a big discussion, and then I just thought, let's do this, and then it became fashion. I'm glad you're saying about the friendship, but I didn't want to just do it almost like it was like a medical journal.
Mm.
So the fact that I then, as soon as I knew that I wanted the friendship, it became part of the story rather than the story, and that's really where it all comes from.
Mm. We're going to talk to each of you, give you a little spotlight on your book, and then there are so many other questions that I've got, but I also want to leave space for our audience because I know they'll want to ask questions too. So just to people who are joining us this evening, I'm going to spend 10 minutes with Coral, 10 minutes with Stuart, and then we're going to open up the floor, and they may well have observations on each other's books too. I, for one, noticed quite a few points of connection when I was reading them. So, Stuart, I might invite you to go and relax in the green room for a little while I talk to Coral, and then we'll pull you back later.
Yeah, will do.
Hi, Coral. So, we've
Hi.
had a bit of an introduction to
Yep.
Jacob's otter here, and you started to talk a little bit about the importance of nature. I
Mhm.
wanted to know a little bit more about that and why, what you've observed there and why that was so important.
I think that most people would say that if they spend time in the natural world, it is like resetting yourself. It's like you get back onto simple mode, uh, where um, predictability sounds boring, but there are predictable things in nature, from the seasons to what we expect certain creatures to do and not to do, and just the way that the flowers will emerge at certain times, and there is this kind of set way of things happening. And I think it's just a brilliant distraction from everyday life, from the complications that we have to deal with now. It's brilliant because like the Mental Health Foundation, they did a report and said it was something like 70% of adults said that they felt more relaxed after spending time in the natural world.
Mhm. That's
So that's a
really
high
interesting.
percentage.
Difference between, you mentioned the word about the complexities
Mm.
of modern
Yeah,
living.
yeah,
And I guess what we're talking about is paring things back to the simple and the
mm,
uncomplicated.
yeah, yeah,
Of course, we know you as a poet, and
yeah.
one of the things that I found in this book was the writing around encounters with animals is done so beautifully. I really wanted to know if you wrote those from observation or just out of your imagination.
Um, I I spend a lot of time outdoors. I love walking and by lakes and rivers, and so whenever I get the opportunity, I'm off walking, and I like to observe what's going on there. I like to observe too, even to the point of my husband and I will sometimes go to the zoo without grandchildren, so that you can observe rather than be tugged on to the next thing, um, because it, I think as you do observe what's going on, um, that in itself is a relaxing, almost a therapy. Just watching something else, a creature. With otters, I love watching otters. I don't haven't watched many in sort of real life, but I did I did watch a lot of otter videos when I was writing Jakob, because I wanted to get things right. And I did nearly make a mistake in that, I at one point in the story I was going to have Piccolo, the otter, uh, just sort of floating on her back, and then I found out that only sea otters float on their backs. So I thought, right, I've got to change that. I've got to change that. So I think observation, whatever you're writing, is essential, and just finding out things that you didn't know before. You thought
Mm.
you knew, but you need to observe and spend some time in research to really understand that particular thing that you're concentrating on in your book.
I mean, it is amazing the things that we're discovering at the moment through animal behaviorists who are
Mhm.
really taking that time
Yep.
to observe, and we know so much more about
Yeah, we
animals
do.
than we did. It's
Yeah.
amazing. Let's talk a little bit about the way the book is written and the choices of the voices that you have
Mhm.
in the book. Um, the main narrative is Jacob's, but you have the inclusion of Marta's poems in there.
Mm.
Um, what were you intending that the different voices would bring to the story?
Um, When I started to write it, I had written Little Light, which is a verse novel, and that's when my editor said to me, I like the way you tell stories. I think you should write a novel, a regular novel." And so I started to investigate that because I knew I was a real newbie in that. And I was looking about whether it should be first person or third person, what's all the difference. And I did find out that if you write in the first person, then there's this unreliable narrator thing that's going on, because obviously everything is from that perspective. So I thought, okay, well, I'm a newbie. I don't want to get this wrong. So how could I balance that? How could I balance the fact that the prose is in the first person? And I suddenly thought, actually, I want Marta, because I'd already decided on Marta. I want Marta to write a poetry journal, and then you kind of counter the only one perspective, because you do hear Jakob talking about his own life and his own perspective, from his own perspective, but then you have Marta uh, after every chapter, kind of just giving a slightly different take. And I wanted Marta in the book too, because as well as a carer, I wanted there to be a character who was super clever, because people think that super clever kids have got it made, and they haven't. They are often teased at school. They're often presented as very plain, a bit intense, and all this sort of thing. And I wanted there to be an opportunity for not only Jakob to have a voice, but also for Marta to have a voice, to be able to present herself and why she is the way she is, why she does the things that she does. Um,
Mm.
so I just found that the two voices were really helpful then.
Now, one of the characters that I fell in love with and is beautifully created is Signor
Signor
Mancini.
Mancini. Oh, he's
Oh,
lovely.
you put the ch in it.
Yeah, I have the ch in it. Yeah, yeah. Signor Mancini is wonderful. Yeah.
Tell me, whether there has been anybody like him in your life.
He's pretty much my granddad on my father's side. My granddad was gentle, kind, wise, but also determined to do what he needed to do at certain times. And he had an amazing workshop. We called it a shed, but it was much more than a shed. It was a very, very big shed. Um, and he wasn't like Signor Mancini. He didn't do carvings, but he was a real maker and fixer, and he had ideas. And so a lot of that workshop is from my memories of my granddad's workshop.
That's quite probably why he's so vivid as
Yeah,
a character. It's
yeah,
wonderful, absolutely wonderful. Now, before I bring Stuart in to talk to him, there are a couple of quotations from the book that I just wanted to explore a little
yeah.
bit. Um, the first one is change is not the enemy.
Mm.
What do you want to tell us about that?
I think that Jakob, as many of us do, I think Jakob has become very regimented and fixed in the way he does life. And a lot of that is outside of his control. It's been imposed upon him. But he has found a security in it too. It's a bit like, when people go into hospital for a long time, they get institutionalized. And he is kind of that way, in that this is how life happens, and I can't let go of it. I can't go and do something else, because this is what life is. And so I think it's important for him to experience all these new things, and realize that actually nothing bad happens to you, and in fact your life just sort of opens up, So that's really where that has come from.
And it speaks to what you were saying earlier, that there's so much through Jacob's experience that speaks to any child,
Mm.
regardless of whether they're
Mhm.
in that
Yep,
situation of
yep,
having to care for a parent. We all
yeah.
go through those same kinds of
Oh,
challenge.
a lot of us don't like change.
And the other one that struck me that I thought might be interesting to talk about is sadness needs an exit.
That's Rosa. Uh, Rosa Mancini is lovely, uh, and she's the sort of person that everyone would go to. And in that role, she has seen the importance of tears,
Mhm,
the importance of that outlet, uh, and not bottling things up. And so she says it because Dan Connick, the father who is hosting Jakob on this holiday, um, he tries to stop Jakob from crying, and Signora Mancini says, "No, no, no, don't do that." And that's when she says that sadness needs an exit. And I think it's good advice for all of us. Sometimes we need a jolly good cry.
mhm.
Uh, and in fact, there's research been done, and it shows in research that when somebody cries, it relieves stress, it lifts mood, and what was the other thing? Uh, oh yeah, it's soothing. It has a soothing effect. Uh, so all of that is useful,
Isn't it
for all of us.
interesting? It's
Yeah.
interesting. My dad was somebody who couldn't deal with anybody that cried,
Mm,
and it was so frustrating because you felt sometimes you needed to, but my mum was quite good at dealing with it, but
yeah.
he just could not deal with
Yeah.
a crier.
Yeah.
Anyway, we're going to come back later
Yep.
to talk with Stuart. I would just tell the audience that I've opened the Q&A, so if you do want to start putting some questions in there, you can. But Coral, I'm going to ask you to retire to the green room for a
I
few
will
minutes.
retire. I'm waiting for that moment to retire, actually.
Here we are. Hi, Stuart. Good to have you back again. And we're going to talk
Yeah,
just a
lovely.
little bit about pieces of us. So much to talk about. But I'm going to start with a quotation from your book. When something hurts so bad, you should write it down, is one of the things that Louis says to Jonas. So I wanted to talk about writing and catharsis. And maybe you've answered this a little bit already, but was there an element of catharsis in writing this novel?
All right. You broke up on me a little bit there. Can you hear me now?
I can hear you. Did you get the
Yeah.
question?
Can you do the last bit for me, Louis? What he
Okay.
says.
Basically, Louis says to Jonas, when something hurts so bad, you should write it down.
Yes.
So I wanted to talk a little bit about writing and catharsis, whether there was an element of catharsis in writing the novel.
And as you can tell, this is coming in and out a little bit here. Uh, I didn't start it to be cathartic. It ended up being so, and it's a very strange thing. It's the happiest I've ever felt writing when I was doing it. It was so something that I felt daunting at the beginning ended up just being wow. This is making me so happy. There was a period before last Christmas where they were so happy in the book that I stopped writing a week before Christmas because I wanted to be happy all over Christmas, and and that's what I did. I stopped. I left them at a really lovely place, and I just thought they're going to stay there, and I want Christmas knowing that they're happy. Yeah, it wasn't my aim, but it ended up being so.
That's really interesting. The notion that writing is so deeply connected to the life that you're living. simultaneously at the same point as you're writing. That's really interesting. And I think with reading, sometimes it's important where you stop reading something when you're reading to young people and to children,
Yeah,
that you pick the moment, that you don't leave them in a moment that's too dark.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, 100%. And I think that's I'm always wary of that with chapter endings,
Mm,
where I would like, if there is a down moment, then I will leave you to dwell on. I will let you have the time on it a little bit, and then it's a case of then, right, okay, now we're going to go again. So I will never start if I'm writing. I will never go straight to the next chapter. I'll walk away for a day or two, and then I'll go back to it again. So yeah, you're dead right. It's just how you had to reset, and that's what you do.
mm, interesting. Um, I wanted to ask you about the title. Now, "Pieces of Us," those words do actually appear in in the story, but titles often are multi-layered. They can mean many different things to us. I wondered whether, without telling us where they appear in the story, why you chose those particular words as the title and how they speak to the story.
Just the last sentence again for me, please.
Oh, this is what happens
I
in
know it's
narrow
this. It's
books.
this.
It was really about the title and the fact that they're multi-layered, why you chose those words. I know that they're in the book itself, but why choose those words? Because they can mean so many different things.
All right, I'll tell you what we're doing. I'm having a nightmare because it suddenly started up playing here. Do you mind if I'm going to say something to you and then hopefully it come through to you. Is that all right? Because I can't quite pick up because it's messing up. All I am going to say to you is that when I was writing the book, I was really conscious that it uh, it was true. So when you said to Carl about the fact that it's from one perspective, Jonas is 100% honest, so there is no dishonesty in his narrative, and I think that's really what I was doing. Was everything Jonas does and what he says is 100% true, and there's no. I don't think there's any misleading in that respect. And I was just linked with Carl, but so when we had the use of the poetry, I nearly put chapters from Louis in the middle at one point, but I thought I didn't need it. Whereas in Carl's case, I thought the insight of the poetry against Jakob's character, to see it from Marta's point of view was amazing. So all I would say is when I was writing, it was just I wanted it to be totally honest, and that everything Jonas does, you can't question it, because when he gets to obviously the physical act of making himself ill, you need to believe that. And that's really what I was just trying to do with that. So apologies if I didn't answer any of your question at all, but I thought I'd just say that. All right.
The answer was great.
Thank you.
I
All
mean,
right.
the writing is confessional in a way, isn't it?
Yes.
And there are parts of it that feel very much like stream of consciousness, as though
Yeah.
there's just an outpouring,
Yeah.
particularly as we get towards the end of that book. And I felt that as a reader, I felt that probably the way it appears on the page in the finished book was pretty much as it
Yeah.
came. I don't know if that's
Yes.
true.
Yeah, I told my publisher that I wanted to write it in 3 months because if I thought about it too much, I would overthink it. And I literally did. I just typed, and you're dead right. It was consciousness, stream of consciousness, and especially at the end when it started to cascade towards the end, it was just don't get in the way of it. Just let it go. And I just felt if I overinterpreted it, it would be overanalyzed by me when really the actions are speaking louder than anything else. And so you're dead right. I did. I literally just typed, never read it again. I didn't read it at all. I just went straight on to the next bit. And it's only when it was in this form that I read it. So
Well, it definitely comes across in that way as a reader. I was interested as well in your choice of setting this in the
yeah,
1990s. It's not the present, and it's not contemporaneous with you as a youth of
yes,
that age either.
yeah.
So, what is it that setting it in the 1990s afforded you that couldn't have happened if you'd set it now or further back in the
Uh,
1970s?
if it had been in the early 80s, which is what it would have been for me, I
Mm,
don't think there's that much difference. What I didn't want it to be totally. I mean, there's a lot of it is biographical, if you like, but I didn't want it to be totally so. So I thought if I move it 10 years, also I think the music was better, and I just kind of yeah. I think there was a case that if I'd left it in the 80, if it was 82, it would have been very almost autobiographical, and I just thought I don't want that. I did want this element of where I could escape as well with the story as much as the reader does. And so, yeah, that's really it. Kind of, I didn't want phones and I didn't want internet, and it was just kind of this idea. I just wanted them. I just wanted those two, and for them, yeah, to kind of for them to be unfiltered and not to have this kind of. I got a message from so and so. I got a, it was just I wanted it to be them seeing each other, and that when you're not with each other, you miss each other,
mm,
and that's the essence. Because these days we can leave each other, we can message each other when we're on the corner, and this I just wanted to go. If he's not there, miss him and miss each other, and that's what I did.
mm. That creates a lot of tension in that
Mm.
sort of absence and having to wait for the phone.
Yeah,
There's a lot of tension around that. Um, you've mentioned the music, and I love the musical references, but also I wanted to talk about literary references. And one of them that you mention is Ian Banks' The Wasp Factory. Why is that relevant to this story? Did I disappear again, Stuart? You've frozen on me actually, just for a moment. So, what I might do, just while I'm waiting for you to come back, are you there, Stuart?
there we are. I am now. Yeah, I heard. I heard the Ian Banks reference.
The Wasp Factory.
Yeah,
It
it was,
just seems a really great choice of title to feed into this
mm.
story. I wondered if you could say
I love the
something
Wasp
about
Factory. I love the book, and I thought the again that was away from technology. Telephones. He was on the phone a lot. I've just realised that as well, um, and the darkness of it was is just so intense as well. Yeah, it's just an amazing book, and I think, by the way, the telephone things in the book are practically true. That was what I was doing, running. That was the case. That the phone would ring at home, and I wouldn't want to talk on the phone because most of us had the phone in the hallway, and the whole house could hear. And I would just run out and go to a phone box instead. So I kind of, when I started writing those scenes, I was really, it was kind of like this is quite real when I was doing the writing scenes. And yeah, Wasp Factory just, I think it fitted with Jonas as well. I think it fit. It was not like I could have a whole number of books, but I think it would have appealed to Jonas.
mm, definitely. I'm going to bring Coral back so that we can have a chat together. But audience out there, please do enter some questions if you would like to in the Q&A, because now is the time for audience questions. But let's bring Coral back from the green room so we
Hi.
can all have a chat together while we are waiting for some questions to come up. One of the things that I noticed when I was reading these books is even though they're very different, they're for very different age groups, very different settings, very different concerns, I noticed so many points of connection when I was reading them. I wondered, I know that you've read each other's books. I wondered if you'd seen something as well. Coral,
Yeah,
did you? Oh, Stuart first.
I messaged Coral during while I was reading, and I was saying I could see why they put our books together,
Yeah,
and
it did.
and definitely, I mean, and I told Coral this. I thought her poetry was gorgeous, absolutely, yeah, gorgeous. I also the bit that I loved as well was when he Jacob addresses the reader directly and says, "You would have liked that. I wish you had been there." That type of thing, and Jonas is doing that when he's saying that to Louis as well. And it puts you smack bang in the situation when somebody does that. And I love the tone of her narrator, and I could yeah, 100%. Like I said, I was messaging and I just said I could see why we did this because the, yeah, it was just great linking the poetry and the story at the same time. It's just great.
Mm.
Mm. It's not just that you've both got characters beginning with J or that orange was chosen for the front covers. That's minor. But I did want to ask you, Stuart, it is written from Jonas's perspective, but there are two levels to the narrative.
Mm.
There's the funeral narration, the bit in italics,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
then there's this diary that he sets off writing because Louis encourages him to do that. That's quite nuanced. Was it always like that?
Well, when I was writing it,
Mm,
yeah, from day one, I think as soon as I started the funeral, um, and I put it in italics, and I suddenly thought, oh, why did I just do that? And then then there's a chapter in the book called "This Is Where We Came In," and it's kind of like bringing it full circle. And like I said, as I'm writing, I'm not a big reader, so as I was writing it, I wasn't sure it was working, but it felt right. And by the time instead of doing a lyric, instead of that, I would do the flashback to a funeral, and it was kind of like, okay, this is quite nice how it's mixing up. And both were kind of doing the same thing in that they were just showing Louis to be this beautiful human, and they were also showing how much Jonas was missing everybody. So they did the same thing, but in a different way.
mm. Coral, did
Mm.
you notice some connections?
Yeah, I think there was a lot of connection. Obviously, there was the mental health thing, um, but also there was uh, the angle of finding someone to trust. And so in both books, there was this sort of release when there was a meeting with somebody who you could 100% trust, uh, to the point of you could drop all the barriers and facade and of I'm okay, and really show who you were. So I thought that was a huge connection there, and there
Mhm.
were others as well. But I just want this opportunity to take this opportunity to ask Stuart something. um, when did you know you were ready to write this story because reflected your own experience? I'm asking that because when I wrote Little Light, it was that when I was a child, we were homeless for 3 years, and we weren't housed in a hotel as the character in that book is. But we had the same cramped feeling in my grandparents' small house with four of us sharing one bedroom for nearly 3 years, and I borrowed a lot of those memories for that book. But it took me a long time before I could get to the place I could write it.
Mhm.
I just
Um,
wonder what your experience is.
Mine was I started to write it, and I got to the line, and it springs out. It's like on the page, but Jonas writes, "If I ever thought anybody, if I thought my dad was going to read this, I wouldn't have started writing the book."
Yeah.
And this sounds, but my dad died 3 years ago, and I'd have to say I don't think I would have written the book if my dad was alive. And that's not because he was this huge authoritarian figure or anything.
Mm,
It's just that there had been so much explaining to do,
mm.
and
Yeah. That is
it,
that's weird because my dad died 3 years ago, and my mum the year after, and before they died, Little Light came out, and I knew I had to have that conversation with them because I didn't want them to read it. Oh, this is all
yeah,
familiar.
it was just one of those where like I
Yeah,
said, he was this huge figure. He was a lovely man,
yeah,
but some of the things in the book, the little bit about when it's your boyfriend on the phone,
mm,
that's true.
yeah,
That is true. That
yeah.
would happen. but that was the aim. That was the 1980s and 1990s. That's what happened.
Yeah,
It's your
yeah,
boyfriend.
yeah.
But what you don't realize is that I can remember that happening at the time, and I was just thinking it was hurting a little bit, even though it was like a bit of laughter. But it was
Mm,
like it hit a little bit. Well, it hit more than anything else. But it was that I literally typed the line. I just thought I wouldn't have done this if he was around, and
yeah,
so there we go.
yeah, yeah.
I am still waiting for some audience questions, and they should know that we are running out of time. So if you want to get your question in, do get it in now. Otherwise, I'd like to ask you one more thing, and that is whether um, you feel that reading does have a role to play in terms of supporting children's mental health. So you've written about it, but does it actually help a reader?
All right. I think I've had the conversation today that if children see themselves in a book, it
Mm,
must help.
mm,
Or if they recognize somebody else as a character and they think, oh, somebody in my class is like that, or something like that.
mm,
I had to override everything. If a librarian had my book on the table and somebody said, what is that? And then it instigated the whole conversation about eating
mm,
disorders. I'm
mm,
happy with that, to tell you the
mm,
truth, because I want the conversation. Obviously, I want them to read, but it's important that everybody talks about it because I didn't.
mm,
When I was 18, 19, I didn't even know what it was called. I was just doing it and not understanding what I was up to. And it's only like later on when you suddenly think, oh, that's what was going on. And when you said about the book being cathartic, um, I learned so much. I would write something and think, oh, that's why I did that, and so many little things like avoiding meal times. My two kids are like 28, 30 now, but they'll mention that I eat around about 3:30 4 every day, and it's because I thought it was just so it was one meal a day, but it's to avoid everybody else eating, so I don't have to sit and watch anybody else.
mm.
And just loads of little things that I learned as I was going through it.
Mhm. There is a question up here, and it's particularly about Jakob Zotter. So I'm going to
Yeah.
read that question, Coral. It's from Kerry, and she says she's going to use Jakob Zotter as a class reader with year 5. I was
Hmm.
just telling you, we've just chosen that as one of
Yeah,
our take one book sequences.
yeah.
But she wants to know, what main messages would you like them to take away from reading the book?
I'd like there to be messages from both Marta and Jakob. As I've already said, that I wanted Marta as a super clever kid to be presented in a good light, because that's not always happened in the past. Um, but with Jakob, I think it's that anything anything everything changes from time to time. You are not destined to always be dealing with the same thing. At the beginning of Jakob, I've quoted J.R.R. Tolkien, who said, "Above all shadows rides the sun." And it was that feeling that I wanted children to know, that whatever's happening to you, um, there is a way of navigating it, and it will not be forever. So that's the main thrust. But there are lots of little things like, you know, confiding in people, not keeping everything to yourself, not feeling that everything is down to you. It's all your responsibility, and really for children to know in classes that there are people that they know, other children who are in that position for real, and that they could do with some friends who don't dump them because they're never available to do all the fun things. Um, so that as well, um, and 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 that in between all sorts of cultures, with all sorts of people from different countries, there are the same consistent needs and experiences, and outworkings of all of that. That we do feel the same thing. There, it's not like you're on your own with the way you feel. People in Italy feel it too. People
Mhm,
in Poland feel like that, and there's a unity then in dealing with things.
mhm,
Can I ask you a quick question? With the poem where it's Jacob's life is not like mine,
Yeah,
which for me it was like the epicenter
yeah,
of the whole thing. It was just that
yeah.
um, when you did that, did you know like the importance of it? Because that was the first time where we really she notices his life's not the same. And what I thought was clever was that you don't overplay the mother's MS.
Mm,
There's not huge reference, whereas that poem
mm,
tells us it in
yeah,
one
yeah.
poem.
That's why I wanted to take Jakob out of his everyday experience.
Mm. Yeah,
Because I wanted Jakob to uh, find himself in Italy. Because when you're a carer, it pretty much runs your life.
yeah,
And
follows you everywhere.
the
Yeah,
biggest danger is for carers to forget who they are, because they're basically playing a role. Um, and so yeah, I didn't necessarily feel that was the sort of center of it, but I knew it was an important poem because I knew that Jakob would react to it unfavorably,
yeah,
because he felt her poem was lovely. It was full of empathy, but he read judgment,
yeah,
his
yeah,
mother.
exactly.
And you don't want anyone to say stuff about your mum.
No, exactly.
Even if you say
Yeah,
stuff yourself, you don't want other people to say those things. So I
yeah.
think it was important. It was an important poem for me because I knew there would be a reaction
Mm.
from Jakob.
well, I can't believe that we're over our time already because there's still so much to explore. But I just wanted to say, Coral, as you were reading that quote from Tolkien,
Hmm.
yet another connection with Stuart's book, which ends very much with the sunshine at
Mm,
the end
yeah,
shining through.
yeah,
More connections
yeah.
going on there. um,
You're good at this. You're too good at this.
Yeah.
Look, I really want to thank our audience for coming along this evening,
Thank
but of course,
you.
most of all, I want to thank both of you for sharing these incredibly powerful, both of them incredibly powerful and important books.